Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's Connect L&D webinar on how L&D teams can enhance employee performance and change in behavior. I am Satyakshi from SpringPeople. We are India's largest enterprise training provider. I will be your moderator for today's session. In today's webinar, we have our L&D guru, Surya Prakash Mohapatra, Global Head, Talent Transformation, Wipro Digital and Platforms. With 2 decades plus years of experience in the domains of leadership development, capability building, and talent management. Surya specializes in orchestrating L&D functions for organizations across multiple geographies. He is a renowned leadership development trainer and has been frequently recognized by global HR entities like World HRD Congress and Human Factor as one of the most talented HR leaders in India. In today's webinar, Surya will help us make the transition and define the key drivers for behavior change and how they are interlinked. He will throw light on how you as an L&D professional can drive that change for consistent results. The three as align, assimilate, and apply, and finally, how to measure the behavior change you helped drive. If you have any questions during the session, please type it in the chat box and they will be addressed by Surya after the presentation is over. So, without further ado, let's start today's session. Over to you, Surya.
Thank you, Satakshi. Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here as part of this webinar organized by SpringPeople, a very famous, renowned organization in the enterprise learning space. And I'm really happy and excited to be talking to all of you about something which is very, very important. A topic which has been flashing in our minds for many, many years, ever since many of us started our career in the learning and development space. This is one topic which never dies down. Employee performance, behavior change. As we look at the next slide, these two important words, employee performance and behavior change. Why are they important? The simple statement I would like to make before all of you is for L&D, it is not about what we are teaching, it's about the impact of what we are teaching. And that tells us in a very profound way why employee performance and behavior change are absolutely critical, absolutely important for the organization. It's the impact that we create, the value that we create for the business, for our customers, for our people. It's the return on investment. That's what matters. It's the performance of the employee. That's what matters. And the performance of the employee is driven by the behaviors that an employee demonstrates. How can we influence the employee behavior? How can we drive behavior change? That's what we're going to talk about. As we move on, this is an interesting fact that all of us know. Come 1st January, all of us make a New Year resolution, or some of us make a number of New Year resolutions. And research findings tell us that 80% of new resolutions fail. 80% of the resolution that people make, they never get fulfilled. They never get implemented. So while we understand that behavior change is absolutely critical for the organization, because the impact of what we're teaching is critical. But we also need to understand that behavior change is not easy. It's not easy. It's difficult. 80% of the time that we make resolutions about our behaviors, we do not honor our resolutions, our commitments to ourselves. So we as L&D practitioners need to keep in mind that when we're talking about driving behavior change, it's a complex, difficult task that we are undertaking. It's not simple. It's not easy. It requires patience. It requires attention. It requires focus. And it needs time. That's something that we need to keep in mind. And if you're game for it, then we are ready to take on this responsibility and then perform our duties as L&D practitioners. But if you're not ready for this complex task of driving behavior change, then it's not going to be an interesting journey for us. So as we move on, let's look at some interesting facts. Let's spend a couple of minutes talking about how behavior change impacts business. As we work for organizations in the L&D function or in the HR space, and we work towards stitching together L&D interventions and programs which can drive behavior change, it's important for us to understand how behavior change can impact business. Behavior change can increase happiness at the workplace. If people have positive behavior, if they demonstrate the right set of behaviors about customer centricity, about business value, about service orientation, and if they demonstrate the right behaviors at the workplace, they succeed. If they succeed, they become happier as people, as individuals. So it's important for an organization to make sure that they drive the right behaviors, because driving the right behaviors means having happy people in the organization. It enhances productivity. I think it goes without saying. It's understood. If people demonstrate the right behavior, and the right behavior leads to improved performance, of course it improves productivity, efficiency, quality of performance, and so on. Essentially, that also leads to better revenue, enhanced profitability. It means business for the organization. So driving the right behaviors, driving behavior change in the organization drives profitability. It enhances customer satisfaction. It enhances your CSAT. It reduces your DSAT. It enhances your NPS scores. So it goes without saying that behavior change can impact business. It could impact positively if we drive the right behaviors, if we enable our employees to transition to the current behaviors to the right positive behaviors, then it can impact the business positively. Otherwise, it could possibly impact the business negatively. As we move on, let's talk about this. There's a very interesting question that I'm going to ask all of you. What happens to an organization if employee behavior never changes? I think the answer must be very clear in your mind. It's fairly simple. If in an organization the employee behavior does not change, it could possibly mean disaster. Imagine an organization where the employee behavior did not change for months together and for years together. Will that organization survive? For an organization to change, for an organization to adapt to change, adapt to the disruptive environment externally and otherwise, the behaviors of the people need to change. The behaviors of the people must adapt to the environment, to the changes in the industry, to the market space, to the economy. That's why it's absolutely important that organization focuses on driving the right behaviors. And in a dynamic, disruptive organization, the L&D function and HR function in the organization enables people to keep adopting, inculcating new behaviors as we move through this journey, which is in this VUCA world. So it's absolutely important we understand that behavior change can positively impact an organization. And if employee behavior in an organization does not change at all, it could negatively impact the organization. Essentially, it could become a disaster for the organization, and organization may not survive if the behaviors of people and leaders in the organization do not change. And you can recall many examples of organizations where the leaders and employees have refused to change their behaviors, their beliefs. Um, they have refused to learn new behaviors, and those organizations have perished, have disappeared. So, this essentially tells us how important and critical driving behavior change is for an organization and also for the L&D function. As we move on, before we talk about the how, before we talk about what L&D function, what L&D teams can do to drive behavior change, it's very important to understand some of the fundamentals about behavior change. More than that, it's very important to understand the wrong beliefs about behavior change. It's important to understand the myths surrounding behavior change. If you don't understand these myths, we might keep making the same mistakes over and over and over again. So there are 6 myths that surround behavior change. The first one, behavior change equals to acquiring knowledge and skills. So sometimes we as L&D practitioners believe that if you have imparted the knowledge, if you have provided the skill set and the right tools, our job is done. But that's not true. And we'll see that in the next few minutes why it's not true. So the biggest myth that L&D professionals like us, not everybody, but there are many out there who believe that behavior change equals to acquiring knowledge and skills. No, it's much more than that. Sometimes they believe that behaviors can change overnight. If I've passed on the knowledge, if I've transferred the knowledge, then that person should be able to run with that knowledge. That person should now be able to implement that knowledge. No, it doesn't happen that way. Because the human mind, human brain is not an empty vessel to be filled with knowledge. It's a flame that has to be ignited. We'll talk more about it. So behaviors actually do not change overnight. It takes time. It requires patience, focus. It requires attention. It requires effort. Behavior change is entirely an individual effort. This is a very, very important myth for all of us to understand because sometimes we subscribe to this. And that's not correct. If we believe that it's an individual effort, then we as L&D practitioners have no role to play because it's absolutely left to the individual to make that behavior change. I think it's of course the individual is the most important character, is the most important being who is responsible for driving his or her own behavior change, but it's not entirely an individual effort. There is more to it, and we'll talk about it. Behavior change is harder the older you get. Sometimes we think, you know, if somebody has grown old, it's difficult for that person to change behaviors at an old age. There is a famous saying that goes like this: old habits die hard. But that's not entirely correct. People can change their behaviors at any stage of their life. At any age, they can change their behavior, whether one is a child or a teenager or an elderly person or an old man or woman. Behavior change is possible at any stage in life. It requires focus, it requires attention, it requires a few things, which we'll talk about. Sometimes we think behavior change is boring because it's you have to change what you have been doing all these days. You have to try something which is difficult, which is not so interesting, which can be boring. But that's not correct. Behavior change can be interesting. It can be turned into an interesting journey as well. Behavior change is not necessarily boring all the time. Is okay if some people don't change their behaviors. Is that correct? Sometimes we think in an organization, it's okay. We can't change everybody. We can't change every person in the organization. We cannot ensure that everybody demonstrates the right behaviors. Well, it could be difficult, but it's not okay because every single individual in the organization needs to demonstrate the minimum acceptable behaviors. So it's not okay if some people don't demonstrate the right behaviors. In an organization, you deal with customers, any interaction with any customer by any individual employee in the organization is a moment of truth. And that moment of truth can make or break a relationship. That moment of truth can consolidate a relationship forever, strengthen a relationship forever, or it can break a relationship forever. You might just lose a customer just because of one interaction. So it's important that as L&D practitioners, we need to keep in mind that we need to drive behavior change, not just for a few people, not just for a majority of people, but I think our responsibility is for everyone because everyone in the organization needs to demonstrate the minimum standards of performance. They need to demonstrate the minimum standards. They need to demonstrate the acceptable behaviors that the organization has defined without exception. So these are the myths about behavior change. So these are some of the fundamental information I wanted to share with you before we move on to the next set of interesting facts, which are extremely crucial for our discussion today. So there is a very famous behavior model that some of you may be familiar with. BJ Fogg, a very famous researcher, organizational behavior expert, a learning expert, has come up with this beautiful model called B is equal to MAT. B is equal to MAT. B stands for behavior, M stands for motivation, A stands for ability, and T stands for trigger. And he generally explains this model with a good example. And I'm going to share the example with you right now. For example, um, your telephone, your mobile phone starts ringing, and you decide not to pick up the call. You decide to ignore it. And I will probably give you a few seconds to think in your mind the possible reasons why you may choose not to answer a telephone call. Take about 30 seconds to think about a few possible reasons why you choose or why you chose not to answer the call. I explain the scenario to you. Your mobile phone rings and you saw the phone ringing, you looked at it, and then you chose not to answer the call. Think about a few possible reasons why you may choose to do so. Keep that in your mind because this is going to be important as we continue our discussion. So that could be possibly, so that could be one reason. One set of reasons could be, I was in the shower. I could not hear the telephone ring. I was in a meeting. I saw the phone ringing, but I was not in a position to take the call. I was otherwise occupied. I was busy. I was doing something very critical, important. I could not take the call. These are a set of possible reasons. There's another set of reasons which could also be possible. The reasons could be like this. Oh, I saw the name of the person on the display and I don't want to talk to this person. Oh, no, I'm not interested in talking to this guy. Oh, I'm not in the right mood to talk to somebody, to talk to anyone now. Well, this could be another set of reasons. I'm not interested. Oh, I hate this guy. I don't want to talk to him. Well, I'm not in the right mood. I'm very upset right now. I don't want to talk to anyone. Second set of reasons. The first set of reasons were I was in the shower or I was in a meeting. I was too tied up. I was working on a project, etc., etc. So in the first set of reasons, all of you, the first set of reasons tell us one thing, that all of you have the ability to answer the call. Just because you were in a meeting, or you were working on an assignment, or you were occupied, or you were taking a shower, you just could not take the call, but you definitely have the ability to take the call. In the second set of reasons, of course, you had the ability to take the call, but you did not, but you lacked something. What is it that you lacked? Friends, you lack the motivation to take the call. You simply lack the motivation. So if you look at this example, B is equal to MAT. So there are three things that are essential for an individual to demonstrate a behavior. One is motivation, another is ability, and the third one is a trigger. The phone rang is a trigger. That trigger made you look at the phone and chose not you chose not to answer the call, or you chose to answer the call. So there are three things that are essential to demonstrate a behavior. You are driving your car, you are at the traffic signal, you have stopped because there is a red signal, and the signal after a couple of minutes turns green, then you start driving. So what are the three things here? The green signal was the trigger that puts you into a decision point about an action. And if you have you had the ability to drive, and you had the motivation to drive, and hence you drove on. So you had the trigger, which was a green light. You had the ability, you had the motivation because you had to go and reach somewhere. You had the motivation, and you demonstrated the right behavior. Sometimes, it happens a lot in metros in India. You are driving, there is a red signal, and sometimes you decide to jump the signal. Did you lack the ability to stop? No, you did not lack the ability to stop, but you lacked the motivation to stop. You did not demonstrate the right behavior because it was not an ability issue. It was a motivation issue. So three things are essential for all of us to demonstrate the right behavior. There has to be a trigger. There has to be something which should trigger this, and there has to be the ability and the motivation. As we move on, I have decided to add one more variable to this, or one more element to this. While I have great, profound respect for BJ Fogg, I believe that it's probably a little incomplete. So I've added one more element, one more component to this equation. And that's a C that I have added here is the conditions. So it's not always the ability or the motivation that influences a behavior. It's also your surroundings, your conditions, the culture that where you live in, the organization that you work for, etc., etc. So the conditions are also important. While you understand what is a trigger, what's the ability, what's the motivation, conditions are the environment. Sometimes you may have the ability, you may have the motivation to do your best, but you may not have the right conditions. Your systems may not be working, your technology may not be supportive, your manager may not be supportive, you may not be having the right work environment. The workplace where you're sitting may not be very convenient for you to work. The physical conditions, the surroundings, the other conditions may not be convenient for you to give your best in spite of you having ability and motivation. Sometimes the conditions might force you. You might be really motivated to give your best, but if there are conditions where there's always aggressive timeline pressure and you're always running, in spite of your best motivation, in spite of your ability, you still may not deliver. You might make mistakes because you're racing against time. So conditions are also equally important when we're talking about behaviors. So going back to the same example, so when you're driving, you see the red signal, you have the ability to stop, you have the motivation and the right intent to stop, but your conditions are very different. You are in a state of urgency. You need to reach the hospital for some reason. There is an emergency very, very quickly. So your conditions sometimes force you probably to demonstrate because of the conditions surrounding you, you may not demonstrate the right behavior sometimes. So it's important for all of us to understand. And as L&D practitioners, we need to understand these components of behavior change. If you don't understand this, we may not be able to drive the right amount of change that we are really thinking about driving in the organization. As we move on, unfortunately, what happens? Most L&D teams focus on ability. We ignore motivation. We ignore the right triggers. We ignore the conditions, and most importantly, we ignore motivation. But we just focus on ability. We just focus on imparting knowledge and skills. But that's not enough. Ability alone will not drive positive behavior change. There is a very old saying that all of us are familiar with, that you can take the horse to the water, but you cannot make it drink. So the horse, in spite of having the ability to drink, may not drink just because it's not motivated to drink at that point in time. So merely focusing on ability will not take us or will not give us the desired results that we need to drive for the organization. I would like to share with you an interesting example because we are talking here about motivation. And when we talk about motivation as a very important driver of behavior change, we need to understand that in an organization, there are two kinds of people. The one kinds of people who are intrinsically motivated to do their best, give their best, demonstrate the right behavior. And there is another set of people who are extrinsically motivated to demonstrate or not demonstrate the right behaviors. The people who are intrinsically motivated to demonstrate the right behaviors are the ones who are driven by their inner calling. They're driven by a sense of purpose. They believe it's their moral responsibility, their duty. Typically, we call this the three P's: purpose, passion, and pleasure. When they demonstrate the right behavior, it gives them the happiness, the satisfaction, the pleasure. It sometimes it helps them fulfill the passion. It also sometimes helps them connect with a purpose. The purpose is their sense of responsibility. But their number is fewer in the organization. There is a large set of people who are extrinsically motivated, and they're driven by three R's: return, recognition, risk. So if I demonstrate the right behavior, what I'm going to get in return? Will I get a promotion? Will I get a salary increment? Will I get a better role? What I'm going to get in return? Recognition. Will I be recognized? Will I be known? Will I be rewarded? And the risk. Will I lose something if I don't demonstrate this behavior? Will I get reprimanded? Will I lose my job? Will my promotion be delayed? Am I going to lose something? So extrinsically motivated people are driven by a sense of external stimuli, which actually is essential for them to demonstrate the right behavior. So it's important for us to understand those principles of motivation. How are people generally motivated? Can training do something about it? Can L&D do something about it? Can L&D drive motivation to drive the right behavior? Apart from building capability, imparting knowledge and skills, apart from creating ability in the person. Now let's move on. So we're going to talk about five interesting aspects or steps which can actually drive behavior change. These are the five actions that L&D teams can take to drive behavior change. Most important thing is the facilitator, the trainer, when he or she engages in the learning process, in imparting learning or knowledge and skills, facilitating learning sessions, the facilitator needs to be absolutely well prepared. He needs to understand what is the organizational vision, what behaviors the organization expects, what skills that what knowledge he or she is trying to impact, what behaviors are expected from the participants at the end of the session, and he should be competent enough to tie these two together: the organization vision and priorities, expected behaviors, and what he or she is trying to enable the participants to demonstrate. So that person has to become an expert facilitator. I think as L&D functions, we'll have to prepare our facilitators. We'll have to prepare so that they can walk in and they can clearly stitch together the organization vision and the behaviors that are expected from the participants. The team vision and the team behaviors, expected behaviors, and the behaviors that he or the facilitator is trying to imbibe in the participants. The getting the facilitator ready is the most important thing, the most important first step. Driving engagement in the learning process. So motivation comes through engagement. So when learning becomes fun, when demonstrating a particular behavior becomes fun, exciting, that drives actual change in real life. So it's important for the learner, for the facilitator, to drive engagement in the learning process, whether through the process of gamification, through immersive learning experience, whether through facilitated interactions among participants. The facilitator will have to drive engagement, because engagement and fun and experience, an immersive learning experience, can drive the right set of behaviors. And when I'm talking about immersive learning experience, it's about leading the participants to that aha moment. When you teach a new skill, teach a new task, a new behavior, and help the participant learn that behavior, help the participant practice that behavior, apply that behavior, and get that aha moment. That drives behavior change. That takes us fundamentally back to the theory of motivation. What really motivates me to demonstrate the right behavior? So the third point, the third action is establishing relevance with the participants. Simon Sinek talks about establishing the why, and which we were talking about a couple of minutes ago as the purpose. So what's the relevance of what I'm learning today in this learning process? Has that been established? Most of the time we have seen that learning programs fail to deliver the desired results because the participants who walk into the classroom do not know why they're in that classroom. So it's leave alone expecting those participants to demonstrate the right behaviors. They don't even know why they're there. So the motivation level is absolutely zero. So it's very important that we establish relevance in the learning process. If L&D teams cannot do that, if they cannot establish the why of my learning engagement, then it's not going to work. It probably would end up as mere induction of knowledge, facts, data, concepts, ideas, not translating into any demonstrated behavior. Ownership. Eventually, the learner has to take ownership, and the facilitator will have to drive towards that. The facilitator will have to drive towards the learner taking ownership. Let's remember the old statement: you can take the horse to the water, but you cannot make it drink. Many of you would have flown in aircrafts to different parts of the globe, different parts of the country, and on some occasions, I'm sure many of you would have been seated next to an emergency exit. Whenever you sit next to an emergency exit, the air hostess comes to you and explains to you how you can operate the emergency exit. The question I want to ask all of you is, imagine in real life, if you have to operate the emergency exit, how many of you can actually operate the emergency exit? I have asked this question in conferences and training programs many a time. On most occasions, 90% of hands go up. They say, we cannot operate an emergency exit at the time of need, at the time of real emergency. What goes wrong? The air hostess, in all the right intent, sincerity, was explaining to you how to operate the emergency exit. But why you cannot operate it at the time of need? Why didn't you learn? Why didn't I learn? Because probably we lacked the motivation to learn. We did not see the relevance. We probably ignored the risk. And we did not take the ownership of demonstrating this behavior at the time of need. So I think while the air hostess does a very sincere and honest job, maybe, perhaps, my analysis could be wrong, perhaps he or she was not able to take you to the point of ownership. So that takes us to the next point, which is the point of choice. So in the learning process, at some stage, the learner has to reach the point of choice, where he or she has to make that conscious choice that from now on, I'm going to demonstrate this behavior. That's where learning happens. That's where learning is complete. Learning without behavior change is not learning at all, because behavior change does not equal to acquiring knowledge or building skills. So L&D teams will have to drive the learners to that point of choice where the learners make the choice to implement the new behavior, demonstrate the right behavior. That's important. Where the learner is excited to implement the new behavior. He or she is inspired to demonstrate the right behavior. He or she makes a conscious decision. He or she has got the aha moment and also a strong resolution, has made a strong resolution that I'm going to demonstrate this going forward. That's where behavior change happens. That's where the real learning happens. And that's the essence of all our learning and development activities. Question is, can we really take the learner to the point of choice? Can we make that commitment? It's going to be an effort, time, it requires patience, it requires attention, focus. It requires more than training. It requires coaching, it requires counseling, it requires giving feedback, it requires providing experiential learning, providing experience to the learner. We'll have to bring and stitch all of this together to be able to take the learner to the point of choice. As we move on, now the question is, how do we really drive sustainable behavior change? Behavior change is not about one aha moment, one um, moment of positive inspiration. It's not about demonstrating the right behavior once. It's about demonstrating the right behavior again and again and again. I think this is a cyclic process where you begin with discovery, discovering the needs of your organization, the priorities, the goals, the desired behaviors, then customizing your programs which are aligned to those business objectives and priorities. Then getting the right executive sponsorship, getting your leaders buy-in, getting sponsorship from the CEO of the organization, from the CXO leaders, from the senior leaders in the organization that we are committed to this intervention. We are committed to the outcomes of this learning intervention. We intend to drive these behaviors through this intervention. Then comes your actual training, the training deployment, which then can be reinforced with retention and coaching and feedback, which can be measured through performance evaluation by actually going back and measuring whether the behavior has actually been demonstrated by the learner or not. Is it actually translating into real performance? And if you see gaps, go back to discovery again. Again, discovery, customization, again, executive sponsorship, and the next training intervention. And of course, then measuring and reporting it out. It's an effort which is cyclic, which is sometimes iterative, which is focused around clearly measurable, demonstrated behaviors. And you don't stop till the time you have achieved the desired outcomes of the behaviors. So these are the steps to drive or produce sustainable behavior change in an organization. Right? So with this, pretty much, we come to the end of this session. As we move on to the next slide, I would like to just thank you for your patient hearing, and here are some of my coordinates if you want to reach out to me. But I would like to pause here, and I would like to hand it over to Satakshi now And if you may have any questions, I would request her to help moderate that so that I can try and answer some of them. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Surya, for your invaluable insights on employee performance and behavior change. I'm sure all professional here will take away some very key learnings and insights from your experience. Now, moving ahead, we are opening a forum for the Q&A session. So the first question is asked by Mr. Ankit. So, Surya, I hope you are able to hear me, like my voice is clear to you.
Oh, yes, absolutely. I can hear you.
Okay. So, first question is, we have often heard learning is a process, not a one-time event. Could you give some use cases to describe how this is achieved? How organizations can transform learning into a process?
Absolutely. I think this is a very important question. So you are right, Ankit. Learning is not an event, or learning is not a few events stitched together. Learning is a journey. And when you say process, I call it a journey. And this journey, which begins somewhere, and then it has the destination. And there are different ways that you can reach that destination. But that journey itself is an experience. So the best way to stitch that together is to build those journeys in your respective organizations. And the journeys can be by roles. If you have individual contributors who aspire to become first time managers, you can stitch together a journey for them. If you have mid level managers who aspire to become senior level managers, you can actually create a journey for them. So when we talk about a journey, it has to be experiential. So when I say experiential, it definitely has to be, it has to involve action learning. So when we talk about an event, it's typically a classroom session or a virtual instructor-led session or a few modules that you expect your participants to go through. And then you announce the start of the event and then announce the end of the event. But the learning is different. It's not just about being at the receiving end in a formal structured classroom program, but it's about experiencing your journey from point A to point B. And the best way to do that, and a good used case would be when you create. I was talking to a very senior leader from one very important international bank which operates out of India. I happened to meet the L&D leader of this bank, and then in the course of the conversation, she was sharing with me about their um, um, the induction program for their new probationary officers. So these new young uh, pass outs from B schools or other prestigious professional educational institutions who joined the bank as probationary officers, they're put on a 3 months journey. And the journey is like this. They're all called to Mumbai, to their headquarters in India, and all of them are given a briefing. And thereafter, they're given a train ticket, which takes them to a village in a suburb of Mumbai, probably about 50, 60 kilometers away, a small town or a village. They're deputed there. Remember, they're all bankers, they're probationary officers who are about to start their career in a bank. They're asked to go there and they're told to spend 3 months there. And they're told to find out one or two or three problems that the villagers in that village are facing, and they're asked to solve those problems. No briefing, no training program, no classroom session. They're sent to a village or a small town where they go, figure it out, find two or three problems which are bothering the villagers or the residents of that village or town, and they camp there and they solve those problems. In the whole idea, the whole premise behind this journey that they have stitched together is to teach them some important skills through experiential learning. And the philosophy that they use in that learning journey is figure it out. So there's no briefing, there is no hand holding. Nobody teaches you what to do, how to navigate this. And the principle, the fundamental principle is figure it out, figure it out. And their logic is, in today's disruptive world, where things are ambiguous and volatile and complex, you must develop the ability to figure it out, how to navigate through this. So they go there as a group to reach this small town or village. They find a place to stay. They then try to build relationship, build trust with the villagers, because they must accept them, try and find out the problems. When this group of people who come from different parts of the country and have never interacted with each other, meeting each other for the first time, need to also develop bonding with each other, they may probably go through that forming, through the process of storming, forming, norming, performing stages, etc. They may have conflicts, they may have ego classes, but they have to deal with all of this in an unfamiliar environment, not just survive there, but also thrive. So that's a good used case I wanted to share with you. That could be one extreme where it's absolutely up to the participants to figure it out. But that could be other blended approach where you can combine it with facilitated interventions plus assignments where people actually navigate through. But the whole point I'm trying to make here is for us to drive behavior change, we'll have to make learning experiential. If we don't make learning experiential, then we'll not be able to drive behavior change. If people in the process of the learning journey, as you call learning as a process, if through that process, if they don't become familiar with the behaviors and did I answer your question?
Okay, now we are moving ahead with the second question. And Abhijit and Prabhakar have similar questions. That is, what can be a simple way to calculate ROI on L&D?
Okay. I think the way I look at ROI is fairly simple. So it's the return on investment. But the return on investment, the investment is for what? The investment is to achieve a business objective or a business goal. So if you understand the business goal very clearly, if you can quantify the business goal, you can always establish the return on investment. So if you're running a high potential managers program to move managers from one level to another, and if you're putting your 25 best managers through that program, the question that you need to ask before that is why at all I'm doing this program. The fundamental question when we discuss ROI is so what? I'm doing this program. So what? What is objective? What difference is this going to make? So if my business objective is to create a pool of next managers for the next line or managers for a particular band or level, and to meet that objective, I have initiated this high potential development program. At the end of the program, I should be in a position to gauge how many of these people are ready to take on or move on to the next position. How many of them are 100% ready? How many are 80%? How many are 60%? Or whatever percentages. So that will tell you whether the investment into that program was effective or not effective. So the fact of the matter is ROI has to be linked to a quantifiable, measurable business objective. At the end of the program, you need to go back and check whether that business objective has been met or not met. I hope I answered the question.
Okay, okay. Now the third question is from Anand Unikrishnan. He wants to know effectiveness of upskilling among L&D specialists specific to behavioral change.
I'm assuming the question is about upskilling L&D
I'm just
professionals.
repeating, right? Effectiveness of upskilling among L&D specialists specific to behavior change.
Okay. So I think today, if you're talking about L&D specialists, and if you're talking about upskilling in the L&D community itself, I think there are a few challenges that we're grappling with today. One is that the whole world is changing. We're transitioning from an old world to new world. We're moving from classroom training to a virtual environment, training in virtual environment. We are greatly leveraging technology, etc. I think one of the important behaviors that we need to demonstrate is our agility and adaptability of new technologies and new ways of learning. I think that's definitely which is something missing today where we need to invest. The second area I think where investment has to happen is in areas like learning analytics, understanding data analytics, and then understanding different data that we're receiving from through our training programs, etc. How do we interpret that? How do we use that data to create better learning programs, etc. The third program is about understanding the whole millennial generation, understanding their taste and preferences, their learning styles, because sometimes you go back and then cater to just one particular segment in the organization, but we'll have to remember that the new age learner has already arrived with very different sets of expectations, learning preferences, learning style, and so on. I think there's a need for learning specialists to upskill themselves. The key areas what I talked about, especially since your question is about behavioral skills, I think it's about demonstrating agility, flexibility, adaptability to change, um, and probably understanding a good business acumen, understanding of the business knowledge, etc., are going to be important skills which are relevant. And then if L&D specialists need to be upskilled, I think these are definitely areas where L&D specialists will have to really look at upskilling themselves. L&D leaders will have to drive that. The question is, effectiveness of that would be for an L&D leader or an L&D head is to see whether he or she is able to meet the business objectives of the organization in a more efficient manner, probably an organization which is smaller in size, which is leaner as an organization, but the outcomes have been optimized. So I keep saying this in different forums that today L&D leaders and L&D practitioners will have to look at themselves as part of a startup organization. They should imagine that they're running a startup which needs to be lean, mean, fighting machine, creating great value for the business at great amount of efficiency and at very low cost, great quality. So this is, I think, is the expectation. This is where the L&D specialists need to upskill themselves. And upskilling of L&D specialists is not just going to be about skill set, it's going to be skill set, mindset, and tool set. We need to understand the new technologies and new tools. We need to have the right skills. Most importantly, we need to have the right mindset, adapting the change, being agile and flexible. Any other question?
Yeah, we have actually, but due to time constraint, we have a lot of questions, but we are picking only the last one. So there's a question by Mr. Vishwanathan Anand. Do you think rewards and recognition can be supplementing training programs? If yes, how far can we use it as a catalyst?
Well, they cannot supplement, they cannot replace each other. Yes, rewards and recognition can supplement, it can complement what L&D is trying to drive. So that's why, going back to the MACT model that we discussed, I think behavior change will come through motivation, ability, conditions, and the trigger. So we need to make sure that all of these are in place to complement each other and supplement each other. Why reward and recognition is important? Because all of us know that when a person is recognized, he or she is motivated to deliver more. But when reward and recognition becomes routine, you expect more, because then you are not satisfied with the same set of rewards that you got in the past. So I think it's a continuous process. So it's not just reward and recognition. I think when somebody is demonstrating the right behavior, we need to give the feedback that you are doing well. We need to recognize that person. Feedback is extremely important. We need to give feedback for course correction. When somebody consistently demonstrates the right behavior, then we need to recognize and reward that person, because that motivates the person to demonstrate the behavior continuously. But the point is, the argument can be that you stop the reward and recognition and people stop demonstrating that behavior. Like sometimes they say that if cops are not there at the traffic junction, many bikers don't wear helmets. So if you have a punitive measure or a reward, you perform, but if you don't see this, if you don't see the return, either a reward or a punitive measure, then you may not demonstrate that behavior. So if it is sustainable behavior, then the desire to change has to come from within. It just can't be externally driven. It can be driven for some time to a point where man is intrinsically motivated. Because one has to be driven by the fact, one has to demonstrate a behavior because he or she wants to demonstrate that, not because he'll be penalized if he's not doing it, or he'll be rewarded if he does it. So that becomes some kind of very formal, regimented discipline. Of course, we'll have to enforce sometimes. Enforcement is essential. I think we'll have to drive to that point of choice, which I was talking about. The point of choice is where the learner makes a choice to implement this behavior, demonstrate that behavior. And that doesn't come overnight. It comes through realization, it comes through self-actualization, it comes through a lot of coaching, counseling, mentoring. When you actually reach to a stage where you believe it's your sense of purpose and sense of responsibility. But till that point, rewards and recognition, feedback, etc., can be helpful.
The last question, although the time is still exceeded, but it is a very Prabhakar Jha has asked one last message or a one-liner message for L&D professional motivation. So this is the last question. Surya, you can take just one-liner for L&D professionals.
Well, I would say that we are here to change. We are here to change behavior. We are here to change people's beliefs and values. We are here to transform people, thereby transform organizations, transform teams, transform nations. So I think we are here to drive transformation. Let's understand the impactful role that each one of us are playing. Our role is not to train. Our role is not just to impart knowledge. Our role is to drive transformation, create value and impact.
Very well spoken, Surya. Truly, L&D professionals are here for transformation of an organization. So now we are on the nearly to the end of the session. So thank you, everyone. We appreciate you being here. We shall be sending out the webinar recording to all you participants soon. I request you to kindly provide feedback before signing off, which will help us improve the quality of our future events. Thanks again for joining us today. Signing off on behalf of Team SpringPeople. Hope to see you again for our next Connect L&D webinar. Bye-bye.